The cold barrel of the suppressed Beretta pressed against the soft skin behind my ear. It was cold, colder than the rain slicking the sole pavement, colder than the look in Kenji's eyes. My breath hitched, a plume of white vapor vanishing into the dark alleyway. I didn't move. I couldn't. The scent of his expensive cologne, a mix of sandalwood and expensive tobacco, vied with the metallic tang of blood pooling near my boots. One squeeze of his finger and the secret of the Sun-Jin Syndicate would die with me. "I told you never to look behind the curtain, Minna," he whispered. His voice didn't shake. It was a low, melodic vibration that crawled down my spine. "Then you shouldn't have left it open," I managed, my own voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he pressed the gun harder, forcing my head to tilt. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the small, battered teddy bear lying in the puddle between us. The one I'd found in his private safe, the one that proved the monster of soul had a ghost haunting his heart. This moment, this intersection of sudden death and a child's toy, wasn't where the story began, but it's where the lie ended. To understand why a man who controls a multi-billion-dollar empire was currently trembling while holding a weapon to the only person he ever trusted, you have to see what happens when the lights go out. You have to see the version of a mafia boss that the world never gets to witness. The version that exists in the silence. 3 months ago, my only mission was survival. As a freelance data recovery specialist, I lived in the digital shadows until a black sedan with tinted windows blocked my path home. 2 men in charcoal suits, men who didn't speak, whose knuckles were scarred and whose eyes were hollow, didn't ask me to come. They simply opened the door. 10 minutes later, I was standing in a penthouse that overlooked the Han River. The floor-to-ceiling glass made it feel like we were floating over a sea of amber lights. In the center of the room sat Kenji. He didn't look like a killer. He wore a white silk shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and his feet were bare on the marble floor. He was staring at a shattered laptop on his mahogany desk. "Fix it," he said, not looking up. "Everything else is replaceable. The data on this drive is not." "I need my tools," I said, my pulse drumming against my collarbone. He slid a heavy silver case across the desk. Inside was every piece of high-end hardware I had ever dreamed of owning. He had done his research. He knew exactly who I was and what I needed. But as I reached for the laptop, my fingers brushed a small framed photo face down on the desk. He moved faster than I could blink. His hand clamped over mine, pinning it to the wood. His skin was fever-hot. For a second, the mask slipped. I didn't see a boss. I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, his pupils dilated, his jaw tight enough to crack bone. "Don't touch the personal items," he hissed. He withdrew his hand, but the heat remained on my skin. I began to work, my fingers flying over the keys, bypass protocols screaming in my ears. As the progress bar ticked upward, the silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. I risked a glance at him. He had walked to the window and was pressing his forehead against the cold glass. His shoulders, usually broad and intimidating, were slumped. He looked small against the vastness of the city he supposedly ruled. The drive clicked. Data flooded the screen. But it wasn't bank codes or hit lists. It was video files. Thousands of them. I opened the most recent one thinking it was a security feed. It wasn't. It was a grainy video of a playground 10 years old. A small boy was laughing, swinging high into the air. Kenji was behind me instantly. I expected him to shut it down, to punish me for seeing. Instead, he just stared at the screen. His hand reached out, his thumb tracing the blurry face of the boy on the monitor. He wasn't a boss anymore. He was a ghost. "Is that?" I started. The heavy oak door to the penthouse burst open. One of the charcoal suit men rushed in, his face pale. "Sir, the elders have arrived. They're downstairs. They heard about the drive." Kenji's transformation was instantaneous. The slump in his shoulders vanished. His face froze into a mask of granite. He buttoned his shirt, straightened his cuffs, and stepped into his shoes. He was the monster again. "Format it," Kenji commanded, his voice cold and detached. "Delete everything. Now." "But this is your only copy," I whispered, looking at the laughing boy on the screen. "I said delete it," he roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. I hit the command. The progress bar vanished. The laughter on the screen turned to black. He didn't look back as he walked out of the room to face the men who wanted his throne. He left me alone in the dark, but he forgot one thing. I was a recovery specialist. I never truly delete anything. I tucked the backup thumb drive into my boot just as the heavy footsteps of the syndicate elders echoed in the hallway. I didn't know then that I wasn't just holding data. I was holding the only thing that could keep Kenji alive, or get us both killed. I stood up, my knees shaking as the door handle turned. The door didn't just open, it was occupied. 3 elderly men in traditional hanboks stepped in, followed by a wall of muscle. These were the elders, the men who had built the Sun-Jin Syndicate on bone and betrayal. They looked at me as if I were a smudge of dirt on their expensive shoes. The girl, the oldest one, spat, his voice like dry parchment. "Why is she still here?" Kenji stood behind them, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. He didn't look at me. He didn't even acknowledge my existence. "She's finished the task. The drive was corrupted beyond repair. It's gone." The elders narrowed their eyes. One of them walked to the desk, his hand hovering over the laptop I had just wiped. He looked at the empty progress bar, then at the beads of sweat rolling down my neck. I felt the weight of the drive in my boot. If they searched me, I was dead. If Kenji caught my eye, he might see the lie. "A pity," the elder said. "That drive contained the only evidence of your father's last wishes. Or so we were told." Kenji took a step forward, his presence filling the room like a physical weight. "My father is dead. His wishes died with him. I am the chairman now. If you want to discuss history, go to a museum. If you want to discuss the future, sit down." It was a power play, brazen, dangerous, and perfectly executed. But as I was ushered out of the room by one of Kenji's guards, I saw his hands. They were clenched behind his back, hidden from the elders, shaking so violently that his signet ring tapped against his skin. The guard threw me into the back of a van. I expected a bullet. Instead, he handed me an envelope thick with cash and a burner phone. "Disappear," he said. "If the chairman sees you again, he won't be in a talking mood." I didn't disappear. I went to my apartment, a cramped studio in a district where the neon signs flickered like dying stars. I plugged the thumb drive into my own isolated rig. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. I knew I should destroy it. I knew that knowing a mafia boss's secret was a death sentence. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at that screen. The way his thumb traced the boy's face. The files were encrypted with a secondary layer I hadn't seen before. It wasn't a military code, it was a sequence based on coordinates. Map locations. I tracked the first one. It led to a small abandoned house in the outskirts of Busan. The second led to a cemetery. The third led to a hospital. I spent 48 hours straight digging through the layers of Kenji's digital soul. I found medical records for a child named Minho, diagnosed with a rare heart condition 10 years ago. Then a death certificate. But the death certificate was signed by a doctor who had disappeared 2 days later. I looked at the photos again. The boy in the playground wasn't just Kenji's son. He was the reason Kenji had taken the throne. He hadn't wanted the power. He wanted the resources to keep someone hidden. Someone he told the world was dead. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "He's coming for you." I barely had time to grab my bag before my front door was kicked off its hinges. 2 men burst in, suppressed submachine guns raised. They weren't Kenji's men. They wore the crest of the elders. I scrambled for the fire escape, the metal grating cold against my palms. I could hear them tearing my apartment apart behind me. They weren't looking for me. They were looking for the drive. I hit the pavement running, my lungs burning in the acrid soul air. I needed a place to hide, but in this city, every camera was a pair of eyes for the syndicate. There was only one person who could protect me, and he was the one who had told me to disappear. I made it to the syndicate's private club, the Obsidian. I slipped through the service entrance, my clothes torn, my face streaked with grease. I found Kenji in the VIP lounge, surrounded by women and champagne. He was laughing, playing the part of the hedonistic king. But when our eyes met, the laughter died instantly. He stood up, spilling his drink. The guards moved in, but he held up a hand. He walked toward me, his pace slow, predatory. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into a private room, slamming the door. "I told you to leave," he hissed, pinning me against the wall. "The elders sent men to kill me," I gasped, pulling the drive from my bag. "Because they know you lied. And I know why." He froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. He looked at the drive, then at me. For a moment, I saw the monster vanish again, replaced by a man who was utterly, terrifyingly alone. "You don't know anything," he whispered. "I know Minho is still alive," I said. The sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place echoed from the door. We weren't alone. A voice came over the intercom, cold and mocking. It was the lead elder. "Thank you, girl. We've been looking for that lever for a long time." Gas began to hiss from the vents in the ceiling. Kenji looked at me, his eyes wide with a realization that came too late. We were trapped in his own sanctuary. The gas was sweet, cloyingly thick like rotting flowers. My vision began to fray at the edges, the room spinning into a kaleidoscope of black and gold. Kenji didn't panic. He ripped the silk tie from his neck, soaked it with the leftover champagne from the table, and pressed it against my face. "Breathe through this," he commanded. He moved to the vent, his fingers clawing at the decorative brass grating. He wasn't using a tool. He was using brute force, his knuckles tearing as he ripped the metal from the wall. He stuffed his own jacket into the hole, slowing the flow. "The door is deadlocked from the outside," he said, his voice muffled. "They're going to wait for us to pass out, then take the drive and finish us." "Why?" I coughed, the champagne-soaked silk stinging my nose. "If they have the drive, they have the boy." "They don't want the boy," Kenji said, his eyes darting around the room for an exit. "They want the leverage. If the syndicate finds out I've been funneling millions into a private medical facility for a son I claimed was dead, I'm executed. They take the throne. And they kill Minho to tie up the loose ends." He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no malice in his gaze. Only a raw, agonizing desperation. "I killed my own father to protect that boy. I took this life because I had no choice. And now, because of my pride, I've led them right to him." He found a heavy bronze statue on a pedestal and swung it with a guttural roar against the reinforced glass of the private aquarium that lined one wall. The glass spider webbed. He swung again. And again. On the third strike, the glass exploded. Thousands of gallons of salt water, exotic fish, and jagged shards of glass flooded the room. The pressure blew the deadlocked door off its hinges. The gas was swept away by the torrent. We stumbled out into the hallway, drenched and gasping. The club was a chaos of screaming guests and panicked security. "We have to go," Kenji said, grabbing my hand. His grip was a lifeline. "If they're at your apartment and they're here, they're already on their way to the facility." We ran for the garage. We didn't take a limo. We took a beat-up motorcycle tucked in the corner, a relic from his youth. I clung to his waist as we tore out into the night, the wind whipping my hair into a frenzy. We were halfway to the highway when the first black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror. Then another. They weren't trying to pull us over. They were trying to ram us. Kenji leaned into the turns, the bike scraping the asphalt. He reached into his waistband, pulled a handgun, and fired blindly behind us. A tire blew on the lead SUV, sending it spinning into a concrete pillar in a shower of sparks. But there were more. If you believe Kenji was right to lie to protect his son, hit the like button right now, I thought, the wind screaming in my ears. Because we're about to find out if love is stronger than the syndicate's law. We hit the mountain road, the city lights fading behind us. The facility was hidden in a pine forest, a nondescript concrete building that looked like a weather station. But as we rounded the final bend, my heart dropped. The gate was smashed. 2 syndicate vans were parked out front. Kenji didn't stop. He accelerated. We crashed through the remaining fence, the bike skidding to a halt in the gravel. He was off the bike before it even stopped moving, his gun drawn. "Stay behind me," he ordered. The silence of the forest was broken by a single sharp scream from inside the building. It was a child's voice. Kenji's face didn't just turn angry. It turned demonic. He vanished into the building and I followed, my boots treading on the shattered remains of a glass security door. We found them in the sterile white hallway of the infirmary. 3 men stood over a hospital bed. A small boy, pale and hooked to a dozen machines, was staring at them with wide, terrified eyes. One of the men held a pillow. Kenji didn't shout. He didn't warn them. He fired 3 times. The men fell like discarded dolls. Kenji dropped his gun and ran to the bed, throwing his arms around the boy. "I'm here," he sobbed, his voice breaking. "I'm here, Minho." The boy didn't speak. He just gripped Kenji's ruined shirt with tiny, weak fingers. But the moment of peace was shattered by the sound of a dozen car doors slamming outside. The elders had arrived in force. And they weren't here to negotiate. The facility was a tomb. The blue emergency lights flickered, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the white linoleum. Outside, the pine forest was crawling with flashlights, a ring of fire closing in on the concrete sanctuary. Kenji stood up from the bed. He looked at Minho, then at me. His face was a map of exhaustion and blood. He wiped a crimson smear from his forehead, leaving a dark streak across his brow. "Take him," Kenji said. "What?" I stepped back, the smell of ozone and antiseptic stinging my eyes. "There's a tunnel. Under the laundry room. It leads to the old well at the base of the ridge. There's a car hidden in the brush. Keys are under the wheel well." He handed me his signet ring. "Take this." If you get to the coast, find a man named Juan at the docks. Show him this. He'll get you on a freighter to Japan. I'm not leaving you here, I said, my voice cracking. You're not leaving me, he hissed, grabbing my shoulders. His eyes were burning with a terrifying clarity. You're saving the only part of me that's still worth anything. They get Minho, they win. If you get him out, they have nothing but a dead chairman. Kenji. Go. A bullet shattered the window at the end of the hall. The elders were tired of waiting. I scooped the boy up. He was lighter than I expected, his body feeling like a collection of bird bones wrapped in a hospital gown. He didn't cry. He just stared at his father, his eyes reflecting the blue flickering lights. Kenji picked up a discarded submachine gun from one of the fallen guards. He stood in the center of the hallway, a lone sentinel against the coming storm. I ran. The tunnel was cramped, damp, and smelled of wet earth. Every time I slipped on the muddy floor, Minho whimpered, a small choked sound that tore at my chest. Behind us, I heard the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of gunfire. It sounded like a heartbeat, Kenji's heartbeat, slowing down with every step I took. We reached the well. The air outside was freezing, a sharp contrast to the stale warmth of the facility. I found the car, a rusted SUV hidden under a tarp. The keys were exactly where he said. As I pulled the tarp back, a hand grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicking out. A man crawled from under the car, his face masked, a knife glinting in the moonlight. He wasn't a guard. He was a professional, one of the syndicate's elite cleaners. He lunged. I threw the boy into the passenger seat and slammed the door. The man's weight hit me, pinning me against the rusted metal. The knife grazed my ribs, a line of fire tracing my skin. I didn't think. I grabbed a heavy rock from the ground and slammed it into the side of his head. He slumped. I didn't wait to see if he was dead. I jumped in the car and floored it. I drove like a maniac through the narrow forest tracks, the branches clawing at the windshield. I looked at Minho. He was shivering, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. It's okay, I whispered, though my own hands were shaking so hard I could barely steer. Your dad, he's coming for us. I knew I was lying. We reached a clearing that overlooked the facility. I stopped for a second, looking back. The building was engulfed in flames. An explosion ripped through the roof, sending a pillar of orange fire into the black sky. My heart stopped. Kenji was still in there. I reached for my bag to find the burner phone, but my fingers hit something else. The thumb drive. The backup I had made. I realized then why the elders wanted the drive so badly. It wasn't just the boy. It was the financial records. Kenji hadn't just used his own money. He had been skimming from the elders' private accounts to fund the facility. He had been stealing from the most dangerous men in Asia for a decade. If I could leak that data to the secondary syndicate families, the ones who hated the elders, I could start a civil war. I could take the target off our backs and put it on theirs. But as I looked at the burning building, a single black car detached itself from the chaos and began heading down the mountain road. Toward us. They had a tracker on the SUV. I realized I couldn't run. Not with the boy. Not without ending this. I turned the car around. If you believe Minna has the courage to face the people who destroyed her life, hit the like button for her, I whispered to the empty car. Because the prey is about to become the hunter. I headed straight for the black car, the headlights blinding me. I wasn't going to pull over. I was going to ram them. The collision wasn't a roar, it was a screech of tearing metal and the sickening thud of airbags. My chest slammed against the steering wheel, the world turning into a white haze of pain and dust. I could taste copper. I could smell the sharp, acrid scent of leaking coolant. I fumbled for Minho. He was curled in a ball on the floorboards, his eyes closed. He was breathing but barely. The door of the black car, a sleek Mercedes, creaked open. A man stepped out. He wasn't a guard. He was the lead elder, the one with the parchment voice. He was bleeding from a cut on his temple, but his eyes were as cold as a winter morning in the DMZ. He held a silenced pistol. He didn't look at me. He looked at the boy. 10 years, the elder said, his voice a dry rattle. 10 years of theft. 10 years of weakness. Kenji was a fool to think a monster could have a heart. He's a father, I rasped, trying to push my door open. It was jammed. He was a tool, the elder corrected. A tool that broke. And broken tools are discarded. He raised the gun. Suddenly, the forest behind him erupted. A figure burst from the brush like a phantom. It was Kenji. His shirt was gone, his torso a mosaic of burns and shrapnel wounds. He looked more dead than alive. He didn't have a gun. He had a length of rebar, charred and jagged. The elder turned to fire, but Kenji was faster. He didn't swing the rebar, He lunged with it like a spear. The metal caught the elder in the shoulder, pinning him against the Mercedes. The gun fell to the gravel. Kenji didn't stop. He threw himself at the elder, his hands finding the old man's throat. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. There was no technique, no mafia grace, just the raw, primal rage of a man protecting his cub. Kenji, stop. I screamed, finally kicking my door open. He didn't hear me. He was lost in the red. I grabbed the elder's discarded gun and fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed through the mountains. Kenji froze. He looked back at me, his face a mask of gore. For a second he didn't recognize me. Then his eyes moved to the SUV. To Minho. He let go of the elder, who slumped to the ground, gasping for air. Kenji stumbled toward the SUV, his legs giving out. I caught him before he hit the gravel. He was freezing. His body was shutting down. Is he? Kenji choked out. He's alive, I said, tears blurring my vision. He's okay. Kenji leaned his head against the car tire. He looked up at the stars, his chest heaving. The drive. Minna, give it to the Park family. Tell them, the elders are weak. Tell them, the accounts are empty. I'll do it, I promised. But you have to stay awake. We're getting out of here. No, he whispered. The others, they're coming. You have to go. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small charred object. The teddy bear. The one I had found in the safe. He pressed it into my hand. Give him this. Tell him. I'll see him, in the playground. The sound of more engines echoed in the distance. The rest of the syndicate was closing in. I looked at Kenji. His eyes were closing. If you think Kenji's sacrifice is the only way to save his son, drop a like so his story doesn't die in these mountains, I thought, my heart breaking. Because I have to make a choice that will haunt me forever. I picked up the boy. I looked at the man who had saved my life and destroyed it all in the same breath. I kissed his forehead, the skin cold and damp. I got back into the car, the Mercedes, not the SUV. I took the elder's phone. I took the drive. I drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the headlights of the syndicate fleet surround the clearing. I saw a dozen men get out of their cars. I saw them stand over the fallen chairman. And then I saw the clearing explode. Kenji hadn't just been waiting for me. He had been holding a grenade. The fire lit up the entire valley. The elders, the guards, the history of the Sun-Jin Syndicate, it all vanished in a single blinding flash of white. I didn't look back again. I drove until the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sea in shades of bruised purple and gold. I reached the docks. I found Juan. As we stepped onto the freighter, the salt air stinging my face, Minho finally opened his eyes. He looked at me, then at the teddy bear in my hand. Where's Daddy? He asked, his voice a tiny, fragile thing. I looked out at the disappearing coastline of Korea. I looked at the scars on my hands. He's in the playground, Minho, I said. He's waiting for us. 2 years later. A small park in the suburbs of Tokyo. A young boy with a sturdy heart and a bright smile swings high into the air. A woman sits on a bench nearby, a laptop on her knees. The Sun-Jin Syndicate is a memory destroyed from the inside out by the data I leaked. The elders are dead. The throne is empty. My phone pings. A message from an unknown number. No text. Just a single image. It's a photo of the playground. From a distance. I look around, my heart stopping. I see a man in a long coat standing under a cherry blossom tree. He has a scar across his brow. He doesn't move. He doesn't wave. He just watches the boy swing. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden. Some monsters are meant to stay in the dark. But sometimes the silence is where the real story begins. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. Because in the end, we all have something to hide. And we all have someone worth dying for.